Let's talk about a Triton Monk. Welcome to my channel. I focus on tabletop role-playing games, video games, and science fiction. According to Volos' guide, Tritons can control air and water. That's on page 118. They can cast a fog cloud. At third level, they cast a fog cloud together with a gust of wind. And at fifth level, they can cast a fog cloud with a gust of wind and a wall of water. If you read the way it's written, it implies that they cast them together. This is an interesting combination because at least that's the way I read it. I'd like to hear some other people, if you've parsed through the language, do they actually cast all three? It's sort of an interesting feature. Now, if you're a monk, you can, and you follow the way of the four elements, you can spend key points to increase the level of spells, which means that they might be able to increase the area effect of the fog cloud by spending key, which has some interesting things there about the monk. So you've got the monk, who's about a 5-foot tall blue guy who can breathe underwater, and the combination of monks seems a little unusual, but it is not too terrible. However, it does bring up an interesting question. How did the character become a monk? What monastery did he go to? What monastic order did he go to? And depending upon your world. But it opens up an interesting idea. And that is to have an entire monastic order in the ocean. And that would allow you to have monks created. Now, these would not be player character monks unless you want to figure out how to do that. But you could use Bullywugs, Lizardfolk, Merfolk, and Sahuaghin in the monastic order along with the Tritons. And because the monks are following their monastic ideals and their asceticism, and they want to the pursuit of their intellectual and spiritual enlightenment as they go through this, that would allow the groups to get along. It would be interesting without creating some interesting conflicts in there. But it would introduce an interesting aspect to water adventures, because you would fighting a Bullywug monk or a Lizardfolk monk or a Sahuaghin monk would be interesting in what their capabilities would be. And it fits into how they go off to become a monk and then come back, and it would be an interesting set of lore to interweave with your environment. Now, why would the Triton? First off, you've got a couple. This would solve a problem of how the Triton becomes a monk, because now he has a monastic order that makes sense for the Triton to attend, because it's under the sea. You would have heard about that. You would, it's not something above ground, because the description of the Tritons are kind of are not really used to dealing with the interactions of humans and various races above ground. They don't fit well with that. They're somewhat haughty. That would fit well with the monk aesthetics. So you would have this monk who's grown up underwater, and he's a Triton. Now, why would he leave the sanctuary or the monastery and go out adventuring? That's a whole nother discussion that your character has to come up with. If you want to, why did you decide to leave the monastery? Which is true with all monk characters. You really should have a reason why that's there. And if you have ever seen, there was a link I did one about where you had the challenge to go and off the terrible old monk who was having problems because he was getting so old that he was having digestive disorders, and they decided he was no longer being helpful to the monastery. Anyway, that's a different story, and I'll try and put the link down into where I have that talked about that one. But the monk here in that's a Triton. He's truly a fish out of water, as the saying goes. In your party, if you're a party adventuring across the land, he's not going to be familiar with the areas because he's a sea-based creature. He's outside that, and he does have this interesting combination of the fog cloud and the monk is sort of interesting. And the gust of wind, you could push your opponents into the fog cloud because you want the gust of wind to end. Anyway, there's a bunch of weirdness about that combination of fog cloud, gust of wind, and wall of water that I'd like to hear some people, if they've played Tritons in there, I'd like to hear some comments. Do you parse it that they can cast all three, and the effect of do you think the effect of adding key to it would allow you to increase the radius of the fog cloud? Could you push people into the fog cloud with the gust of wind, and so on? But that's all Triton with some monk in there. It's just a little odd combination. It's not the most absurd character I've seen. I've mentioned some of the characters I thought which were totally absurd, but it's unusual combination in the fact that if you follow the path of the four elements, the other paths don't seem to fit as well, and it sort of fits with the Triton's capability with controlling air and water. They'd focus on the air and water more than fire and earth with the four elements. So I'd like to hear your comments. Have you played a Triton monk? Do you want to play a Triton monk? How would you establish the backstory about why they left? Would you have them, found as a baby on the doorsteps of the monastery and raised, which would be kind of strange for a Triton. But that's a possibility. Or would they, join there, be sold to the monastery, whatever. There's a whole bunch of possibilities of how they ended up at the monastery and how they raised and what did they do, or why did they decide to leave the monastery. So those are the questions that have to be answered by your player character as they build out their background. Would you want to integrate this into your campaign? The idea of having a monastic order under water, to me, has some interesting plot hooks that you could put together to put into a world. And I may steal that one. That one has some interesting possibilities to interweave. But like I said, I've always had problems with characters never wanting to go underwater adventures. They prefer above ground if given an option. I don't know. Have you had characters want to go into an underwater adventure? They always worry about drowning. So I'd like to hear your comments. Thank you for watching my video. I look forward to learning what you think about this video. Let me know in the comments below. If you like the video, press the thumbs up button. You can subscribe by clicking the link in the lower left. If you are interested, there are links to more content.